Good morning, Matt. And nice wig, by the way. Mission Impossible was a popular television series that ran for 171 episodes between 1966 and 1973. Your mission, should you decide to accept it, is to make the first in what might be a series of videos regarding the tape recorders that we use to deliver the mission briefing at the start of many episodes. You should begin with the model this message is being played on, as it was the most commonly used device, appearing in a total of 48 episodes across all 7 series. This message will not self-destruct because it was really hard to find one of these machines. I mean, even the little tape reels are a weird diameter, so you'll probably never find any more of those. Perhaps we can just use some rubbish green screen effect to transition out of this section instead. For anyone out there who hasn't seen the original Mission Impossible TV series, it more often than not opened with Jim Phelps arriving at an unusual location at which he'd retrieve a tape player and an envelope of photographs that would explain the mission objective for that episode, and once the tape had played, it would self-destruct. The mission briefing wasn't always delivered by a mini reel-to-reel tape recorder though, especially in the first season where Stephen Hill played Dan Briggs. They played around more with using other media, but the mini open-reel tape recorders are the ones that most people associate with the show. The machine we're looking at today first appeared in episode 26 of the first season, and then its final appearance was in episode 21 of the last season. Now, just counting the appearances in the briefing section, this machine was used in 48 episodes over the course of the series, making its most regular appearances in the last 2 seasons that aired between 1971 and 1973. Of course, the Philips compact cassette had been on the market for quite some time by then, first appearing in the US around the mid-1960s. However, the cassette was only used in one mission briefing scene in Season 2, and this appearance is especially unusual as Jim brings along his own tape recorder with him in order to play back the cassette. Normally, the tape player would be found in the location. The cassette player used in that scene was a very similar model to this one, but to make it appear more visually interesting on camera, they removed the cassette door so that the revolving cassette reels could be seen more clearly. Now, the open reel tape recorder I've got here doesn't look too familiar yet, however it is the same design as the one seen in the show. But just like that Philips cassette recorder, in its standard configuration the tape reels are hidden away behind a cover and are only visible through a small window. So again, to make the player more visually appealing for television, the door was taken off. Now, it's not intended to be removed, so doing so fires a couple of springs across the room, and without that lid in place the machine is left with an unsightly raised section on the right hand side. So it's important to shoot it from the right angles, preferably from above. But the player is seen with its cover in place ever so briefly in just one episode of this series when it's removed from the bag on the back of a motorcycle, but the cover is taken off before the tape is played. Taking a closer look at the machine itself, the model is a Sanyo MC2. It dates from approximately 1965. It's a simple mono half-track quarter-inch tape recorder. It has controls for play and rewind, but there's no fast forward. There's a speaker on the rear and there's a volume control on the side. And it's a machine that's really more suited for recording voice than music. And that's because, like most of these mini open reel machines, it doesn't employ a very sophisticated mechanism. It's edge drive, which means the tape doesn't get controlled in speed by a pinch roller and a capstan. So over the length of the reel, the tape speed will vary. It's fine if you play the audio back on the machine itself, but you wouldn't want to play these reels back on a more sophisticated machine. Those tape reels are an unusual diameter. They're just over 2¼ inches across, or 63 millimeters. And when they're on the player, they rest upon rubber platters that are rotated from the edge via the drive shaft from a motor that's located underneath that gets angled to make contact with either reel depending upon the desired direction of tape movement. A separate switch on the end selects whether you want to record or play, and recordings are performed via an external microphone. And the recording level sensitivity can be adjusted through monitoring with an earpiece while adjusting that volume control. The plastic case can be opened up with the removal of just one screw, and the whole machine is powered by 4 AA batteries. Now, these alkalines, I found, are a little bit of a tight fit in that battery tray. They're a little bit wider in diameter than a standard battery, but you can see that the overall space in the machine has been used very efficiently. and the machine itself has a reassuring weight to it. Now, looking at the front here, you can see the tape path is helpfully drawn onto the backing there, and once I've removed the tape head cover, you can see how that record mechanism operates. Sliding the switch to the record position also spins a permanent erase magnet into the tape path, because of course recording starts with the tape being erased and then written to. Now, looking at the tape path, you can see how the tape would go in between the record head or the play head and these felt pads, which get pushed up against it when the play is activated. And of course, if you activate record, it spins that magnet into position, and then the tape also travels between that and the pad that's on the other side. Now, the machine that I've got here is a Sanyo MC2. However, it was sold in the US under the Craig brand, as this was a more familiar name to the households there. There were also many people who would actively avoid buying any Japanese brands, but barring cosmetic differences, the Sanyo and the Craig were one and the same machine. Now, earlier on I mentioned that this machine made 48 appearances in the mission briefing sections on the show. However, that's not necessarily 48 unique appearances. You see, some of the episodes were two-parters, but also some of those appearances were recycled. On a number of occasions, the intro sections were reused in other episodes. It was a cost and time-saving measure. The audio from the tape recorder was of course dubbed in post, as were the close-ups of the hands holding the photos. So it was a relatively easy job to just reuse the overall setup for the scene, but just swap out the audio from the tape player and the close-ups of the hands showing the photos. Sometimes these intros were reused a number of years apart. Now, this is one particularly interesting recycled intro that I've found. Rather than just reusing the exact same clips, they've recorded two passes on the same day, but with Peter Graves wearing a different jacket and tie each time. They were then able to use these in episodes that they aired a year apart from one another. Now, they also used this same telescope idea for the briefing again in another episode from season 4, although in this one the telescope is in a different location. However, when it comes to the close-ups of the tape machine playing, it did give them the opportunity to just reuse the clip that they'd shot 2 years earlier. These intros always added a bit of fun to the start of an episode though, because it was interesting to see where the tape recorder was going to be hidden this week. But the locations always had to follow a very strict set of rules, one that's not immediately obvious, but when you've seen a few of these you tend to start to notice. The intro I made at the beginning of this video wouldn't have worked in the show as it didn't adhere to the rules. You see, when Jim turns up at a location, the tape recorder and photos were always stored in a place where a member of the public couldn't have accidentally stumbled across them. So they would either be secured with a lock of some sort, for example they were behind a door or in a cabinet, and Jim would bring the appropriate key for this with him, or the tape recorder would be guarded by a fellow agent, and in order to gain access to it, a conversation would have to take place, and provided the correct question and answer response was passed between the two, Jim would then be allowed access to the briefing material. And once the tape had been retrieved, it would also be played in a location where it couldn't be overheard by anyone. Now, just imagine trying to think up well over 100 different scenarios like this. It's no wonder they ended up reusing a few. Now, when Jim got to the briefing section, as we mentioned before, the audio would be dubbed in later, so that then left Peter Graves doing his very best "I'm listening to audio that isn't really there" facial expression. A supercut of these could last for hours, and given what he had to work with, I think this should be recognised as some of the best acting work in the history of television. Now, once that tape had been listened to, it would sometimes be just disposed of, but most people will remember the more common "this tape will self-destruct in 5 seconds, good luck, Jim," at which point it went up in a puff of smoke. Well, in this episode, I think I can see how they achieve this effect with what looks like a plastic tube piping the smoke into the bottom corner of the tape player. And you can see in this shot how the tubes of paint are arranged diagonally. But after we then cut away to Jim, the next time we see them, they're lined up straight, and again that's presumably to conceal that smoke pipe. In some scenes, no doubt, they drilled a hole through from below, but the easiest way to conceal the pipe was just to show the tape playing in a wide shot, then cut to a close-up of Jim, but then when you went back to the tape machine again, this time you'd framed it so that one corner of it is off camera. Now, if we wind that one back, we can see that the machine that goes up in smoke was a pretty scratched up one with a damaged logo on the front, whereas the model in the preceding shot is in much better condition. After a while of looking at these, the swap from the functioning machine to the smoke prop becomes quite obvious. But of course, on television back then, no one would have been able to spot things like this. 21-inch CRT in the corner of the room, 1960s or 70s blurry TV. No, it doesn't really matter. Just like how no one would have noticed this black tape covering the manufacturer name on the cassette. But talking of which, you can see in this first appearance of the Craig 408 how the prop guys have dirtied up the logo in an attempt to conceal it. Now, the next time the machine is seen in another episode, the Craig logo has a black line drawn through it. But then in subsequent episodes, it gets covered up with various colours of tape. Until finally, in Season 4, the machine acquires the logo that it's going to display for the remainder of the series. Now, initially, I thought that logo was something created specifically for the show. But it turns out it's actually an existing one that's used by Craig. And you can even see that it's the same logo that they stamped onto their plastic tape spools. However, the models of the 408 that were sold to the public didn't have this design printed on the head cover. And it seems like Craig, in an attempt to get their logo into the show, must have uniquely applied this to the machines that were used on there. And you can see the sticker on this particular one is peeling off slightly in this close-up. Now let's just move on to a few very slight anomalies that I spotted while putting this video together. You can see here that the right reel isn't properly located upon its spindle, so it's wobbling around a lot, and the same goes for the left-hand reel in this next shot. Now this next one is a little bit harder to see because the scene's quite dark. That might be deliberate because the tape on these reels is severely chewed up. You can see along the top as it moves between one and the other. Something bad has happened to this prop at some point. But one thing that's almost inevitable whenever a reel-to-reel tape player is shown on screen is misthreading of the tape. The correct tape path is drawn on this machine, and the tape is supposed to travel on the inside of this silver peg on the left. And on the whole, throughout the series, they get this right on a commendable number of occasions, but inevitably they do slip a couple of times. However, the biggest goof by far while using this particular machine was in this episode, where somebody decided to run the film of the tape player backwards. However, an honourable mention goes to the episode with the cassette player. So the tape goes into the machine, black side facing up, but the close-ups show it playing with the white side facing up, and then when the tape gets disposed of, it goes towards the bucket black side up, but then falls into the bucket white side up. You can see why they didn't use the cassette again. But Mission Impossible had a big influence on me when I was watching the reruns in the 1980s. Even though the technology they showed might have been a bit out of date, whether it was real or imaginary, it still fascinated me, and it's no doubt one of the reasons why I'm doing what I do today. So I hope you've enjoyed watching this video about one of the real pieces of 1960s tech from the show, but that's it for the moment. As always, thanks for watching.